to introduce you to our guest speaker, Mick Brooks. He's from Enfield CLP. No?
Ealing Southall.
Ealing South. Sorry. London's all the same to me, Nick. Don't worry. All right. Ealing South. And he's also the, let me get this right at least. Where is it? Yes, I've got it on this page. Mick is also the Labour representative on the Labour Representation Committee, and he is the political secretary. The president of the Labour Representation Committee is a gentleman called John McDonnell. So with knowing John, I'd very much like to get to know Mick, and I'd like to leave it now to Mick to actually talk to us about coronavirus. Will the economy bounce back? So Mick, all over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. You all hear us okay? Yep. Right. We're faced with a situation which none of us have ever been confronted with before. We have a combination of the most serious public health pandemic for 100 years since the Spanish flu. And then on top of that, the Bank of England is saying we have facing in Britain an economic crash, which could be the worst we've seen for more than 300 years, since before the South Sea bubble burst in 1720. Now, the point about that is that these two are not separate events, they're interconnected. One influences the other. That's not a universal view. For my sins, I used to teach economics. I regard economics as a sophisticated apologia for the capitalist system, or at least most of what we tell the kids is that's what it serves to. And the economist's position has tended to be that the economy was going along swimmingly. It was just like Starship Enterprise going through the space, and then unfortunately it's been bombarded by a meteorite shower in the form of the pandemic, and that's the problem. And that is complete nonsense, because if you actually look at the British economy in the 3 months to February, that's before the pandemic actually hit. In those 3 months to February 2020, the economy grew 0.1%. In effect, it was completely stagnant over that period. That is not peculiar to Britain. That is the world economy has been in a very anemic state since the last crash, which was what is normally called the banking crisis of 2008. Now, the banking crisis, if we want to call it that, it was a classic capitalist crisis reflected in the banking sphere, was a near-death experience for the capitalist system, and it hasn't really recovered since. It's been on life support. To give one example, the Bank of England sets interest rates for the economy as a whole, and at the moment, their interest rate is 0.1%, which is the lowest it's ever been. When the Bank of England was set up in 1694, the standard bank rate was 5%. So it's never been as low as 0.1%, and that's an indication of how powerless the economy is in. So there is what has been widely prognosticated by the economics profession is that there'll be a V-shaped recovery. That, yep, the economy is going to go straight down. It's never been down by as much before. It went down by 20% in 1 month in April. Never happened since records began before. But then they say it's going to bounce straight back up. So it'll be a V-shaped recovery. And I think that is extremely unlikely. I'm not going to give you all the reasons because I think it would take too long. But when I used to teach economics, the thing I noticed that all the things that didn't go along with the favourable view of capitalism were in little footnotes, and they were very obscure. And one of the obscure footnotes was a thing called hysteresis, which I suspect is a Greek term. And but the point for the economics profession was that made it as incomprehensible as possible to most people. But actually, the concept is a fairly straightforward one. And in the financial press, they've been using the English expression scarring. What is going to happen to the economy, what is already happening to the economy, is a deep scarring process. And what this concept says is that once the economy is nuked, you can't unnuke it. You cannot wind the clock backwards and pretend that things have never happened. Once businesses close down, they stay closed down unless something happens to allow them to reopen. And that is likely to be what is going on now. So in the first place, it's quite false to say that the problem is just COVID-19. COVID-19 is making the crisis worse, that's true. It's a much deeper crisis because of that. But from all the signs, looking at the world economy, there would have been a recession in any case this year or next year. Quite agree that there's 500,000 people died because of the coronavirus, and that is very bad news, not only for those people, but for the economy. It's devastating for the economy as a whole. But there was going to be a recession in any case. Now, the second idea that comes out is that when we get the virus licked, then it'll all go back to normal. Well, the point is, we're not going to get the virus licked anytime soon. We've already heard about what's happening in Leicester. We've heard what's happening in meat processing factories in various parts of Britain and also in Germany. We know that countries that handled the virus much better than ours, because there was a long litany of mistakes and incompetence, which have caused thousands of unnecessary deaths in Britain from the Tory government. But countries such as Germany and South Korea, which did by and large all the right things, have nevertheless seen a resurgence of the pandemic, a second wave, if you like. And that is very likely, apart from the fact that the government is continuing to make huge mistakes, and the idea that they're going to send all the kids back in classes of 30 in September, and they're going to fine their parents if they don't send their kids to school, is outrageous, because the parents have generally supported the teaching profession on their cautious approach to reopening the schools. Gavin Williamson has been completely useless. And it's actually been the teaching profession that has sort of sat around and thinking, how can we make this work? Can it work? And they've been worried about it. It's clearly been deeply concerned about the kids, unlike the Tories, who seem to think, let's get back to business as usual. That's the main thing. So what I'm saying is the virus hasn't been licked, and it's not going to get licked anytime soon. Social distancing is going to have to continue for a long time. They were talking yesterday that the big rock festival in Somerset, that may not take place next year, because it takes apparently 200,000 people head off to a muddy field in Somerset every year, and that obviously social distancing is out of the window in a rock festival like that, and they may not be able to even show it next year. So that means that there are vast permanent changes going on in the world of work and in the economy, and it might be worth having a think about them. The first one is in relation to air transport. Now, I live in West London, which is quite near Heathrow Airport, and frankly, it's been very nice not having so many planes flying overhead, But it's got to be said that 79,000 people work in Heathrow, and that's just directly employed. That doesn't include all the catering companies that feed the place. It doesn't include all the warehouses that they're around, and that's just Heathrow. So 79,000 people plus, biggest employer in West London. Are they going to get their jobs back anytime soon? It's the same as a lot of office workers have found out that they can work perfectly satisfactorily from home. Well, Heathrow is mainly a business person's airport, and these people are flying 3,000 miles across the Atlantic for business trips. And now they are discovering, belatedly in my opinion, that you can do this equally well on Zoom without all the perks and privileges of going halfway across the earth. So I don't think that air transport is going to recover anytime soon. And there's been mass redundancies, not only also in the aircraft industry. Are starting to happen, because if you're not having the planes flying, then what's the point in building them? And we got a particularly obnoxious case in British Airways where Willie Walsh is the boss, and he is quite emphatic that he wants to sack everyone or sack thousands of people and then re-employ them on much inferior wages and conditions. In other words, these vast changes could go really against working class people. The same is true with the hospitality industry. That's pubs, restaurants, hotels, and cafes. There's nearly 4 million people employed in the hospitality industry. Any little parade of shops in London, I'm sure it's the same in Chester, I've been there a few times, you've got some miserable little chicken and chips cafe or takeaway where the people are open about 18 hours a day, and it's quite clear that they're struggling to stay open. And this is the sort of thing that's going to push a hell of a lot of those business into bankruptcy. The same is true of pubs. You know, some pubs will survive, although, you know, I was talking to some fellow who sells takeaway beer from his pub, and he hasn't the foggiest idea how he's supposed to implement social distancing, how he's supposed to keep records of people. The government doesn't do detail, it seems. It just sends out these edicts. This is the way it's going to be, and then you have to get on with it. So what we have is, on the one hand, we have bosses like Willie Walsh who want to put the boot into working class people. He's been wanting to do that for donkey's years, but he thinks this is his ideal opportunity. And then on the other hand, there's been a huge movement the other way. And that huge movement is signified, for instance, by 750,000 people volunteering to help their fellow human beings in the first 3 days after the pandemic struck. There's a huge movement that we should not go back to the way it was before. People, humble people who've been treated for years as drudges and certainly paid like drudges, like social care workers, nurses, delivery drivers, bus drivers, all these sort of people, all of a sudden they're heroes, except they're not being treated like heroes when they look in their pay packets at the end of the week. But a lot of people are saying, millions of people are saying, well, that was wrong. That's got to stop. There is potential movement for what you might call the 1940, the mood of 45, the mood that swept a great reforming Labour government into office in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. I'm not saying that's going to happen. What I am saying is there's going to be a clash. The bosses definitely want us to get back to where we were before and actually work under worse conditions, to actually use the crisis as an opportunity for them to recover their profits. But there are loads of people who want a change. Now, at the moment, I don't think the Tories can put the boot in. For instance, they've paid out billions of pounds actually on this furlough scheme. We have 9 million people on furlough, and we have an additional 2.8 million people who are officially unemployed. Furlough is going to be cut down from August, and it's going to cease after October. What's going to happen to those 9 million people? That's the question. We have a situation with potentially the most devastating spell of mass unemployment, but they can't put the boot in yet. They had to spend that money. This is my judgment, and you may well disagree with me, but they had to spend that money at that stage because they were not strong enough to go back after us. But there has been all sorts of bullying. In relation to education, tens of thousands of people apparently joined the National Education Union because they were deeply concerned about their kids and about the future of the schools. There've been loads of extra shop stewards and workers' representatives, and the NEU is enormously strengthened by the stupidities of the Tory government. The same is happening in other places like the Communication Workers Union, the postal services, where workers are well organised. But there are more and more people, there are millions of people, as you know, in this gig economy that are not even officially employees. They have to clock in, they have to wear a uniform, but apparently they're really self-employed and free as a bird. Well, that's just a fiction. The fact is that those people are under the hammer. I've been going on a bit. I've got another couple of minutes.
Mick, keep going. You're quite all right. You've only been going for about 20 minutes.
All right. Okay, so there are millions of precarious workers in the gig economy who are deeply concerned about their prospects of going back to work. There's a huge increase, as you probably know, in demand for food banks. There are millions of people who are suffering all kinds of real hardships. Now, tomorrow, we're going to get a big speech from Boris Johnson, apparently, about build, build, build. And we've had this in London for 8 years. We had to put up with this bloke. And we know about his building schemes. There is, for instance, a garden bridge. You may not have heard of it because it does not exist. But it cost 40 or 50 million quid of our money was wasted on this vanity project. And I suspect that that's what we're going to get from them at this stage. Now, the national debt has soared. Of course it has, because there's all these people who are not working, but they're having to pay out for furlough, and they're going to have to they're paying out for universal credit, inadequate as that is for these people. But the national debt is now bigger than the national economy. You know, the amount of goods and services that 65 million people produce in a year is less than the debt that has been accumulated by the government. But that's only the government's debt. That's not the total debt. We also have a vast corporate debt inherited from the last crisis. So I said that capitalism had a near-death experience in 2008. It's been in intensive care ever since with these artificially low interest rates. The Bank of Japan is actually looking at negative interest rates. In other words, they pay you to lend them money. So you pay them to borrow money, to lend them money. And that's it. The total debt in the world is more than 3 times what the world produces. So there's been a huge burden of debt, which has not been eliminated over the last 11 years since the economy started to recover in 2009. And that means that capitalism is likely to hit a second near-death experience. Sadly, this does not mean that the capitalist system will crawl away and die, because it actually has to be replaced. But it does mean that any the capitalism that survives will be an extremely sickly body. In this country and most other countries, advanced countries at any rate, we have hundreds of thousands of what are called zombie companies. Companies that can just about keep their head above water because of these artificially low interest rates. Interest rates are actually below the rate of inflation. And that has enabled them just about to survive. But the effect of this pandemic is likely to completely finish off a load of those companies. So it would be nice for me to end by saying, well, I think that this is what's going to happen. But I don't think I can do that, because we're at a very early stage of a crisis. I tried to point out the fundamental changes that are going to take place in the economy and the world of work over the next few years, but we don't know who's going to win. We do know there's going to be a fight. There are millions of people who are saying, look, the way it was before is not good enough. This is an opportunity to change. There are other people, particularly the boss class and the Tories, who want to put us back to the way it was before. Whose watchword is business as usual. That's what we need, business as usual. And we can't say, I'm not prepared to say at this stage, who's actually going to win. What I can tell you is that we're faced a unique situation. I believe it is unique, that none of us have ever experienced before, and that some extremely dramatic events are going to take place over the next few years. That's it.
Thank you.